Greetings, everyone. I'm Jed Schlackman. I work as a holistic counselor, a hypnotherapist, and energy healer as well. In this video, I'm going to review some information that's come up in a new research publication on the topic of past life memories and mental health. So this is something that was published in a professional journal, and we're going to look at this article about that publication. So there's an article on the StudyFinds website, studyfinds.org, that's titled "Having Past Life Memories Linked to Striking Rates of Mental Health Struggles." And it's reporting on research that was led by Sandra Maciel de Carvalho at the Federal University of Juiz de Fora in Brazil. So at the bottom of this article, they reference the actual study, the publication where this research is available. It's an article that was published by Sandra Maciel de Carvalho, Jim Tucker, and Alexander Moreira Almeida in 2025, and the title of the journal article is "Who Does Report Past Life Memories? Claimers Profile Religiosity, Spirituality, and Impact on Happiness and Mental Health," published in the International Journal for the Psychology of Religion. So if you want to look up the source material, that's where you would find it. I'm going to share now some of the summary from the StudyFinds article. It says here, in a nutshell, nearly half of Brazilian adults who report past life memories screened positive for symptoms of depression, anxiety, or PTSD at rates higher than many high-stress groups. So that's half of the Brazilian adults in this sample that they surveyed, not of the whole population. 71% reported childhood phobias, far above typical rates, with most persisting into adulthood. Some linked fears to how they believed they died in past lives, while unusual desires and phobias predicted poorer mental health. Spirituality and positive religious coping often improved outcomes, suggesting faith can buffer distress. Adults who say they remember previous lives are reporting unusually high levels of mental health disorders at rates far above what is typically seen in the wider public and even in many high-stress professions, according to new research from Brazil. The national survey of 402 adults found that nearly half screened positive for common mental health symptoms such as depression and anxiety, while almost 4 in 10 showed signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. By comparison, past studies of trauma survivors have reported lower levels of PTSD. For example, 17.8% in Gaza, 28.4% in Cambodia, and 37.4% in Algeria. Brazilian firefighters who regularly face dangerous and traumatic events showed rates between 3.5% and 12.9%. The researchers caution that these are screening results, not formal diagnoses, but they emphasize that the unusually high rates deserve closer attention. These findings suggest that adults who claim past life memories and report phobias and philias in childhood have a higher chance of reporting high levels of depressive and anxiety symptoms, the authors wrote in their paper published in the International Journal for the Psychology of Religion. They may be a population in need of mental health care, considering they are more likely to have common mental health disorders. One of the most striking findings came from participants' childhoods. An overwhelming 71% said they had unexplained phobias as children, compared with about 7.4% in a global research cohort and 12.5% in a Brazilian cohort. Even more striking, 71% of those childhood fears carried into adulthood. Many linked their fears to how they believed they had died in a past life. One woman who said she had lived in Prussia described panicking as a child whenever she heard planes overhead. She would run inside shouting, "Plane, run," and hide under her bed, waiting for an explosion that never came. She later connected the fear to memories of wartime bombardments. Beyond fears, about 30% of participants reported unusual urges or desires at a very young age, such as cravings for tobacco, alcohol, or even early sexual behaviors. One participant believed she had been a psychopathic man in the 17th century and recalled experiencing desires for tobacco and sex starting at age 4. Who reports past life memories? The people who reported past life memories looked very different from Brazil's population at large. More than half, 54.5%, identified as spiritists, a religion that embraces reincarnation, compared to only about 2% of Brazilians overall. 2/3, 68%, held college degrees, compared with just 16% of the general Brazilian population. Nearly 8 in 10 were women, and 93% said they believed in reincarnation. The memories themselves often began spontaneously in late adolescence or early adulthood, around age 20 on average. They spanned from prehistoric times to the 20th century and across 23 different regions of the world. Most stories described ordinary, often difficult lives filled with hardship, not glamorous pasts. About half of participants, 54%, also reported birthmarks or physical marks they believed matched fatal wounds from previous lives. Religion and spirituality played a double-edged role. On the one hand, unusual childhood desires and lingering phobias strongly predicted worse mental health. On the other side, most spiritual practices seemed to protect against poor outcomes. People who reported higher levels of spiritual practice, forgiveness, and positive religious coping strategies tended to score better on happiness and mental health scales. In contrast, those who used negative religious coping, such as feeling abandoned by God or believing their suffering was divine punishment, had worse mental health. Having a belief system to make sense of strange experiences may reduce distress. The authors suggest we may hypothesize that the lack of a cognitive framework and a social context that accepts and makes sense of past life memories may explain part of the distress we found in this population. Interestingly, Spiritism teaches that forgetting past lives is a blessing meant to prevent unnecessary suffering. This suggests the memories were not simply products of religious teaching. The researchers stress that their work doesn't prove or disprove the reality of past life memories. Instead, it highlights a population experiencing unusually high rates of psychological distress. To our knowledge, this is the first nationwide survey about past life memories among adults, the authors noted. Nearly half of participants said their memories influenced their lives, with more describing negative effects than positive ones. Whether these memories represent something real or purely psychological, the people who report them are struggling. The authors argue that clinicians should be more aware of the issue and that more research is needed to understand how best to support individuals reporting these experiences. Disclaimer: this study does not prove or disprove the reality of past life memories. It relied on self-reported data and psychological screening tools, not clinical diagnoses. The findings highlight a need for more research into the mental health of people who report these experiences. Readers should interpret the results cautiously. And I'll skip down to the funding and disclosures reported. The work was supported by the Bial Foundation of Portugal. The authors reported no potential conflicts of interest. The study was approved by the Ethics Human Research Committee of the Federal University of Juiz de Fora, and all participants signed informed consent forms. And again, this was published in the International Journal for the Psychology of Religion. So I want to share some thoughts about that research. And I present this as a hypnotherapist who's worked with thousands of clients and worked with many people who have accessed quote-unquote past life memories. I think of them as memories of other incarnations of the soul, and we don't necessarily look at that through linear time. From the soul's perspective, those incarnations can all be viewed as occurring simultaneously, and past, present, and future in a way coexist within that field of information or field of consciousness. It's only our physical reality perspective that's perceiving it in a linear time progression. And one way I look at this research is with the understanding that most people, most of the time, are not accessing the soul's other incarnational memories. So we're focused here on this current lifetime, and very rarely or infrequently is there any sort of lead-through of memory from other lifetimes. When that does occur, it is often related to some type of trauma that's not resolved from that other time. So it's something that's coming up from our subconscious to bring about an opportunity for healing. So that's why it's not really a random sampling there. People who are having memories from other lifetimes are having them often because there is some psychological distress that was present that hasn't been addressed or resolved. So naturally, you would expect that people who are accessing those memories in their current life are more likely to be experiencing some form of psychological distress, because that psychological distress from that other time is kind of rippling out into their present life experience. So in that population of people who spontaneously connect to past life memories, you would see a significantly higher incidence of symptoms associated with clinical diagnoses of mental health issues. And it is true that having a positive spiritual framework to process your experiences functions as kind of a buffer against psychological distress. So trauma is in part a result of your lack of resources or a lack of mature framework from which to view the experiences. That's why having well-informed or more conscious and aware therapists and professionals to support you can make a big difference in how you're able to navigate and process those experiences, whether you'll integrate it in a healthy way or whether you'll be kind of stuck in some state of distress or trauma. In the hypnosis work that I do, I'm often guiding people in a very conscious way to help bring healing to issues in their current life that may have an origin in experiences in other times. It could be other times in the current life, from childhood, even from infancy or in the womb. It could also be other incarnations. So all of those are potential influences on our present psychology, our present psychological health. So the therapeutic process involves helping people access positive spiritual resources, positive psychological resources to help them address any stress or trauma that might have been carried from some other time. And so when you can access those resources and then reprocess or review the distressing experience, it gives you this opportunity to perceive that experience in a different way, to release any emotional charge, any negative beliefs that might have been attached to that experience, any physical trauma, any emotional burden. So it can bring about healing on a very deep level. And it's important to be open to this process, even if you don't believe in reincarnation or other lifetimes, to at least put that belief aside and be open to any healing process that your subconscious is ready to help facilitate with you. So there are many issues people may come into therapy with that may, at least in part, be related to memories from other lifetimes. And if you have a resistance to that possibility, if you reject that potential reality, you're actually rejecting a significant potential for healing. You're blocking people or blocking clients from potentially finding relief or resolution to some psychological distress they may have encountered. So I would recommend looking for therapists who are open to this more expanded spiritual understanding, and they don't need to be connected to any particular religion or religious faith. In the study I just described, it comes from a country where Spiritism is a popular belief system, and Spiritism is very much open to the idea of reincarnation and to the practice of mediumship, of consulting spirits from the non-physical realm for guidance. But it does have various limitations, in a sense, in its belief system. It has some attachment to the Judeo-Christian faith or teachings, so it's not a completely universal spirituality. It's kind of a blend of Christianity and spiritualism and some other traditions that are common in Brazil. So it's kind of an amalgamation, in a sense, of a few different types of religious concepts. And as a therapist, I personally seek to not be limited by any dogmas from any spiritual faith. I seek the soul's truth or the soul's higher perspective. Essentially, I look for deeper truths, a higher wisdom to bring guidance and help people in their healing process. For many people, their religion or faith is an important filter through which they are processing their experiences. So we may use the imagery or the spiritual concepts or practices that a person has a connection to or has comfort with in the healing process, but we're not limiting ourselves to that either. For those that are interested in regression therapy, in the topic of spiritual regression, past lives or other incarnations, you can read more on my website. I have a section there in the hypnosis category where I focus specifically on regression therapy, where you can read about that practice and about how it can be beneficial. My website is phinsights.com, phinsights.com. For now, I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful day. Namaste.